Hey folks, I've just finished recording my highlights video for the 2022 StereoNet Melbourne HiFi Show and discovered that my audio recording software had crashed just after I started. So all of the audio for this video is coming from my camera and it may sound pretty bad. Because I don't have a lot of time to reproduce the video, I've got a bunch of reviews I've got to get to for you. I'm going to try and recover the audio straight from the camera, but I just want to jump in and let you know that I apologise if the sound is a bit crappy, and I hope that you can put up with that sound quality and enjoy the content that I've recorded for you. So thanks for your patience, apologies for the issue, and enjoy the content. Hey folks, welcome to an unusual episode of Passion for Sound. And I say unusual because this one's not a proper review of a whole lot of gear, but rather it's a few highlights I took away from the 2022 StereoNet Melbourne HiFi Show. As you can imagine, with it being a really big show, I didn't get to see everything and hear everything, and so I tended to focus on specific products that I had a personal interest in, and then I found a few surprises along the way as well, of course. But I do want to flag that just because I haven't mentioned it here doesn't mean it wasn't great. These are just the things that I was personally interested in that I either sought out or that caught my attention during the show. Part of the reason I couldn't try everything was because of the blind listening test I was running, and so if you're not aware of that and you want to know more about what the blind listening test did and was all about, then please check out the video on that one. I think it was really interesting and I hope you will too. But for now, let me share in no particular order my highlights from the Melbourne HiFi Show. The first one I'm going to mention, and as I said, these are in no particular order, but the first one I want to mention is the Klipsch, the 5 speakers. I was walking down the corridor, actually on my way to see the Kef LS60s, we'll get to those shortly, but on the way past, I heard these tiny little active speakers. Now, I'm not a speaker guy. When I do play with speakers in the house, they tend to be actives, and so I wasn't aware of the Klipsch 5s until I heard them playing at the HiFi Show, and I was absolutely gobsmacked. The sound that these put out is absolutely incredible for their size, and I mean that in terms of the quality and quantity of their bass, but not just that they get loud, but that they deliver that level of impact and quality and speed of bass without getting harsh or nasty in the top end. They maintained a sense of clarity and quality in the sound, and this was in a wide open atrium area that was absolutely huge. So I was incredibly impressed. I've spoken to the guys at Clap Audio Visual who had the stand. They're going to have a chat to Klipsch, and we're going to see if I can get a pair here for review soon. So stay tuned if you're interested in those. My next highlight though, and I'm going to mix it up here and bounce between some speakers and some headphone related content. The next one that I found was the Raal SR1B. I'd heard a lot about these, but I'd never tried them for myself, and I was really fortunate that Hugo from Indie Hi-Fi had a set in his room. He also had the ZMFs, but I'm well and truly familiar with those. They would have been a highlight otherwise, of course. But the thing that stole the show for me in the Indie Hi-Fi room was the Raal SR1B. If you're not familiar with these are essentially an ear speaker. They're like a headphone, but they sit out from your ear slightly, not as far as my hands are here, but they sit out from the ear slightly, so there's no seal, and they act more like a speaker, but without any of the interactions in the room around you. They're a ribbon-based design, so they've got that level of speed and precision that we often think about with things like electrostats and some planar drivers, but not all, of course. And what that means is they deliver a speed and a sense of transient attack, and I don't mean that in a harsh way, but just their ability to be fast and accurate. That's pretty much unparalleled with most other things I've ever heard. Hugo had them set up from the Felix Audio Envy headphone amp, and it was driven through a special adapter box because the SR1Bs have incredibly low impedance, so you do need to connect them up to a separate box if you're using a normal headphone amp. But it's a little bit different from, say, an Energizer in an electrostat, if you're familiar with those. In this case, and I believe this is a new thing, the SR1B adapter box basically just provides a slightly higher impedance load to the headphone amp, and basically it's to prevent you shorting out the headphone amp. Now, I didn't take note of all the prices. I do know that this would have been quite an expensive setup between the Envy and the SR1B and their adapter box, but the end result was some of the best headphone audio I've ever heard. If I had to criticise it, it doesn't have quite the bass impact and presence of a more closed type headphone, and I say closed as a circumaural rather than an ear speaker, but what you get instead is this incredibly fast, very accurate, incredibly well imaging sound, and it's all structured in this wonderful soundstage. I did get a chance to try some stacks at the show, and I haven't included the stacks in this video because to me, the SR1B edged them out overall for total maximum sound quality. Admittedly, some of the stacks models did provide a better sense of bass presence, despite what some of you may have heard. There are electrostatics that provide excellent bass, and indeed some of the stacks did do better there, But the SR1B for me had a certain magic to its presentation that just went above and beyond the stacks that I heard at the show. And so that's not a knock against the stacks, that's just huge praise for the SR1B, because they don't have the presence and weight in the bass that I would sometimes want, and I wouldn't call them anemic, just to be clear. They're a little bit light on bass, but they're not overly thin. I would choose something like an SR1B in terms of its tonality over, say, an HD800, but personally my preferences do lean towards a bit more bass than the SR1B offers. And I say that just to highlight that for me, they're a headphone or an ear speaker if you like, that for me would probably not be for every single genre, but for vocal focused content, for acoustic content, some jazz, they are absolutely magical. And indeed, in talking to Hugo, he enjoys them with electronic music, so it's going to come down to your own personal preferences, but the SR1B absolutely deserved a mention here. And in fact, it reminded me most of the HiFiMan's Susvara, but taken to a whole nother level. It drops a little bit of the bass that the Susvara has, but that ability of it to deliver the transients and the leading edge of notes with just the most pristine speed and clarity is really special. I say all this because I don't yet know if I'll be able to organise a review, but I will chat to Hugo and see what we can arrange. Moving on though now, let's talk about another speaker, and that would be the aforementioned Kef LS60s. I was really excited to see these because, as I mentioned before, I'm kind of an active speaker person if I use speakers at all, and the Kef LS60s absolutely did not disappoint. If you're not familiar with these, they're an all-in-one active, meaning that they've got the DAC, the amp, and the streaming capabilities all inside the speakers themselves. So literally all you do is you plug these speakers into the wall. I'm assuming, I didn't check this, that there's a cable between the two speakers, and then away you go. There's no amp, there's no DAC, there's no streamer, there's just a pair of powered speakers and an app. And the sound they deliver was absolutely wonderful. They produced in a relatively bad room a wonderful soundstage and a beautiful crisp sharp image. Their tonal balance was also excellent, and they delivered everything from the bass notes all the way through to the treble with an effortless sense of quality and clarity, but also power as well. The LS60s are another speaker that I'm hoping I might be able to get my hands on for review. If you've watched the channel for a while, you'll know that I don't do a lot of speaker reviews. In fact, I hardly do any speaker reviews. But the Kef LS60s and the Klipsch the 5s are two that I absolutely want to get my hands on. And the LS60s are even calling for a place in my home because I enjoyed them that much. So do stay tuned, make sure you're subscribed, and hopefully I can share a full review of the LS60s in the months to come. For now though, let's go back to headphone land and talk about the Meze 109 Pros. I've chatted a little bit about these with the patrons of the channel already, so they already know a little bit of this. Apologies for repeating myself, patrons. But the 109 Pro is a new headphone from Meze Audio. These were actually a pre-production model, fresh as I understand it from the Munich high-end audio show, and so they're not necessarily a finished product, and yet they're already beautiful and comfortable and they sound great. They're kind of like an upscaled, open back and higher quality, bigger brother if you like, of the 99 series headphones. And I say that because they use a sprung suspension band and a similar overall design language to the 99s, but they sound completely different. As always, the engineering and the comfort from Meze is absolutely fantastic. And I said to a few people at the show that I could just stare at the grille inside the headphone for hours on end. It is one of the most beautiful pieces of engineering I think I've ever seen. And so the 109 Pros are physically beautiful, wonderfully comfortable, and they do also sound great too. But I'm not going to say too much about the sound because I don't know if they're going to change a little bit between now and pre-production. What I would say is that they provide a wonderful sense of space and clarity whilst also remaining quite musical. But the one criticism I have, keeping in mind this is pre-production, is that I feel like the treble peaks in there could be tamed just a little bit. And that's not because they're harsh or sibilant. I actually feel like the treble was wonderfully smooth despite outstanding high-end extension and a certain degree of presence and energy that's really enjoyable. I thought the treble quality was excellent. The only reason I think that those treble peaks could do with being pulled back just a dB or two is that it does throw off the tonality just a little bit and make them sometimes not as natural. And what I mean by that is that they'll slightly overemphasize the sound of a cymbal or a snare, for example, and just draw your attention to that when you probably should be more focused on the vocal. And that's my one and only criticism of them. They're very enjoyable to listen to. They sound wonderful. As I said, they produce a beautiful sense of soundstage and imaging. I just hope that in the final version, they tweak the tonality ever so slightly just to balance things out a bit better. But But either way, they are a headphone that we should be excited for. I believe they're going to retail somewhere in the $800 to $1,000 range, but that's all to be confirmed, so don't set any expectations from that. What you can set an expectation on though is that I will absolutely be reviewing them as soon as I can get my hands on a production model, so make sure you subscribe, ring the notification bell. I keep saying that in this video, but there's so much great content coming. Speaking of great content coming, if you want to get early access to it and also see my review schedule for months in advance, it's literally booked that far out, then they're the sorts of things that patrons get access to, so you can check the link down below through to Patreon and have a look at the benefits and see if you're interested in. We've got a great little community formed. I'm always looking for ways to add extra value, and I'd love to see you come along as well. So take a look at the link if it's of interest to you, and I look forward to seeing you on Patreon. For now though, let me get to my final major highlight before a couple of little special mentions. And the final major highlight was a revisiting of the PS Audio FR30 speakers. You may have seen my first impressions video about them, where I was lucky enough to attend the launch here in Australia. And if you have seen that video, you'll know that I generally really thoroughly enjoyed them as a speaker. I thought they were fantastic overall. But I commented on the fact that the imaging from them was a little bit wide. It wasn't as focused as I kind of expected from a speaker at that level. There was talk that it could have been the room, the setup, the amplifiers driving them, lots of different factors. And so I was keen to go back and try them again, and I'm so glad I did. The team from Magenta Audio, who are the distributors of the FR30s, had set them up with a different amplifier this time, and that was the Moonriver 404 integrated amp. The Moonriver, as I understand it, is essentially a modern design using vintage principles. So it's kind of like a vintage amp built today. And the sound from the Moonriver with the FR30s was nothing short of spectacular. The imaging was precise and pinpoint. The sound had a wonderful sense of ease and a very natural tonality. It was just an absolute joy to listen to. It's also worth noting that they were in an even smaller room that was probably worse acoustically than where the launch was held. And so I am thoroughly impressed with the FR30s at this point. I completely understand why some people who have heard them elsewhere have raved about them, and I think they're very special, and I look forward to seeing and hearing more of them. I should also mention that for those of you in Melbourne, I believe the FR30s have been organised to stay a little bit longer at Hey Now HiFi, so if you're interested in hearing them for yourself and seeing why I love them so much, you can contact Jeff at Hey Now HiFi and see if you can set up a visit. And so that brings me to the end of my major highlights from the show. As I said, there's lots I didn't get to, and there's lots that I can't include in this video or it'll just go way too long. But there were two final things I did want to mention for those that were curious about other stuff that might have been there, and that is that I finally got myself a chance to listen to the Sennheiser IE600s and also the HD820s, which up until that day I still hadn't heard. Now admittedly my listen to the HD820s was pretty poor. It was with someone else's music, turned to a volume that wasn't really right for me. And so I had a really quick listen just to see how similar or different they were from the HD800S, and to me they sounded different enough that I'm keen to get a pair in and listen to them for a review. Likewise with the IE600s, I was keen to see how they compare to the IE900s because I've had a number of viewers tell me that they prefer the IE600 even though it's the cheaper earphone. So I took a bit of a listen, and I completely get why people prefer the IE600, even though personally I do still prefer the IE900. That said, I'm talking to Sennheiser about getting both the HD820 and a pair of IE600s into the office for a review, and I'll share that with you as soon as I can. So stay tuned for that one, but it's still probably a couple of months away. The final highlight that I want to share, and it's probably more for those that are enthusiasts and just to share the enjoyment of this hobby, is that NOS Tubes were there. That's the name of an actual shop or a retailer of NOS Tubes, of course. They were there with a whole lot of different NOS tubes. Now, if you've got no idea what NOS means, it means new old stock. So these are old production tubes that have been sitting in boxes, warehouses somewhere for ages, and are now being sold like they're brand new, but they're actually really old tubes. I was able to pick up a pair of Shugwang KT88 Black Treasures and also a pair of Mazda 12AU7s to use in my Elekit TU8200R. And if you're wondering, it's not that Mazda. This is actually Mazda that's made in Europe apparently. The Mazda from Europe eventually went broke, and coincidentally, there's Mazda in Japan that's a completely different company. So I bought myself a couple of pairs of tubes to go into the 8200R, which I use mostly to drive my Susvara, and I have to say, the sound is absolutely sublime. So I really appreciate the advice that Ian from NOS Tubes gave me. If you're in Melbourne, or even Australia for that matter, and you're looking for tubes for your amps, then do check out NOS Tubes. He's got a wonderful range, and he's a lovely guy to deal with. And so that ties up all of my highlights from the HiFi Show. There was so much to see, there was so much to do. I know lots of people that came along and said hello to me as viewers of the channel. They had a great time there as well, and they had their own highlights that go far and beyond what I've shared here. But hopefully you've enjoyed this sneak peek into what I enjoyed, what stood out to me, and also some of the things that I now hopefully have coming in for review. So as always, I hope you found this review useful. Hopefully I've sparked your interest into some things that maybe you hadn't heard of or hadn't considered before. But for now, let me leave it to the music. So happy listening, and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.